Now we will read about body fluids and circulation. In this section, we will read about blood, lymph, tissue fluid, circulatory pathways, double circulation, regulation of cardiac activity, disorder of circulatory system. You have learned that all living cells have to be provided with nutrients, oxygen, and other essential substances. Also, the waste or harmful substances produced have to be removed continuously for the healthy functioning of tissues. It is therefore essential to have an efficient mechanism for the movement of these substances to the cells and from the cells. Different group of animals have evolved different methods for this transport. Simple organisms like sponges and coelenterate circulate water from their surroundings through their body cavities to facilitate the cells to exchange these substances. More complex organisms use a special fluid within their bodies to transport such materials. Blood is the most commonly used body fluid by most of the higher organisms including human for this purpose. Another body fluid, that is lymph, also helps in this transport of certain substances. In this chapter, you will learn about the composition and properties of blood and lymph, that is tissue fluid, and the mechanism of circulation of blood is also explained herein. Blood. Blood is a special connective tissue consisting of a fluid matrix, plasma, and formed elements. Plasma. Plasma is a straw-colored, viscous fluid constituting nearly 55% of the blood. 90 to 92% of the plasma is water, and proteins contribute 6 to 8% of it. Fibrinogen, globulins, and albumins are the major proteins. Fibrinogens are needed for the clotting or the coagulation of blood. Globulins are primarily involved in the defense mechanism of the body, and albumins help in the osmotic balance. Plasma also contains a small amount of minerals like sodium, calcium, magnesium, bicarbonate, chlorine, etc. Glucose, amino acid, lipid, etc. are also present in the plasma as they are always in transit in the body. Factors for coagulation or the clotting of blood are also present in the plasma in an inactive form. Plasma without the clotting factor is called serum. Formed elements. Erythrocyte, leukocyte, and platelets are collectively called formed elements, and they constitute nearly 45% of the blood. Erythrocyte or the RBC are the most abundant of all the cells in the blood. A healthy adult man has, on an average, 5 millions to 5.5 millions of RBC per millimeter cube of the blood. RBCs are formed in the red bone marrow in the adults. RBC are devoid of nucleus in the most of the mammals and are biconcave in the shape. They have a red colored, iron containing complex protein called hemoglobin, hence the color and the name of these cells. A healthy individual has 12 to 16 grams of hemoglobin in every 100 ml of the blood. These molecules play a significant role in the transport of respiratory gases. RBC have an average lifespan of 120 days, after which they are destroyed in the spleen, that is graveyard of the RBC. Leukocyte, also known as WBC, that is white blood cells, are as they are colorless due to the lack of hemoglobin. They are nucleated and are relatively lesser in number, which averages 6,000 to 8,000 per millimeter cube of blood. Leukocytes are generally short-lived. We have two main categories of WBCs, that is granulocytes and the agranulocyte. Neutrophils, eosinophils, and the basophils are different type of granulocytes, while lymphocytes and the monocytes are the agranulocytes. Neutrophils are the most abundant cells, that is 60 to 65% of the total WBCs, and the basophils are the least, that is 0.5 to 1% among them. Neutrophils and the monocytes, that is 6 to 8%, are phagocytic cells which destroy foreign organisms entering the body. Basophils secrete histamine, serotonin, heparin, etc. and are involved in inflammatory reactions. Eosinophils 2 to 3% resist infections and are also associated with allergic reactions. Lymphocytes, that is 20 to 25%, are of the two major types, that is B and T forms. Both B and T lymphocytes are responsible for the immune responses of the body. Platelets, also called thrombocytes, are the cell fragments produced from the megakaryocytes, that is special cells in the bone marrow. Blood normally contains 1,50,000 to 3,50,000 platelets per millimeter cube. Platelets can release a variety of substances, most of which are involved in the coagulation or the clotting of blood. A reduction in number can lead to the clotting disorder, which will lead to the excessive loss of the blood from the body. Now, blood groups. As you know, blood of humans beings differ in certain aspect, though it appears to be similar. Various type of grouping of blood has been done. Two such groupings, that is the ABO grouping and the RH, are the widely used all over the world. ABO grouping. ABO grouping is based on the presence or the absence of two surface antigens, that is chemical that can induce immune responses on the RBC, namely A and B. Similarly, the plasma of the different individual contain two natural antibodies, that is proteins produced in the response to the antigens. The distribution of antigens and antibodies in the four group of blood, that is A, B, AB and O, are given in table 18.1. You probably know that during the blood transfusion, any blood cannot be used. The blood of a donor has to be carefully matched with the blood of a recipient before any blood transfusion to avoid severe problem of clumping, that is destruction of RBC. The donor's compatibility is also shown in table 18.1. Blood group A, antigen on the RBC A, antibodies in the plasma NTB, and the donor group is A and O. Blood group B, antigen on RBC B, and the antibodies in plasma anti-A, and the donor group is B and O. Blood group AB, antigen on RBC AB, A and B, and the antibodies in the plasma nil, and the donors group is all AB, A, B and O. And the blood group O, antigen on RBC nil, and the antibody in the plasma anti-A and anti-B, and the donors group is only O. From the above mentioned table, it is evident that blood group O can be donated to person with any other blood group, and the hence O group individuals are called universal donor, and the person with the AB group can accept blood from the person with the AB as well as other group of the blood. Therefore, such person are called universal recipients. Now, RH grouping. Another antigen, the RH antigen, similar to one present in the rhesus monkey, hence RH, is also observed on the surface of RBC of majority, that is nearly 80% of the humans. Such individuals are called RH positive, that is RH positive, and those in whom this antigen is absent are called RH negative, that is RH negative. An RH negative person, if exposed to the RH positive blood, will form specific antibodies against the RH antigen. Therefore, RH group should also be matched before transfusions. A special case of RH incompatibility mismatching, that is mismatching, has been observed between the RH negative blood of pregnant mother with the RH positive blood of the fetus. RH antigen of the fetus do not get exposed to the RH negative blood of the mother in the first pregnancy, as the two bloods are well separated by the placenta. However, during the delivery of the first child, there is a possibility of exposure of the maternal blood to the small amount of the RH positive blood from the fetus, and in such cases, the mother starts preparing antibodies against RH antigen in her blood. In the case of her subsequent pregnancy, the RH antibodies from the mother, that is RH negative, can leak into the blood of the fetus, that is RH positive, and destroy the fetal RBCs, and this could be fatal to the fetus and could cause severe anemia and the jaundice to the baby, and this condition is called erythroblastosis fetalis, and this can be avoided by the administering anti-RH antibodies to the mother immediately after the delivery of the first child. Coagulation of blood. You know that when you cut your finger or hurt yourself, your wound does not continue to bleed for a long time. Usually the blood stops flowing after some time. Do you know why? Blood exhibit coagulation or the clotting in response to an injury or trauma. This is a mechanism to prevent the excessive loss of blood from the body. You would have observed a dark reddish brown scum formed at the site of a cut or an injury over a period of time. It is a clot or a coagulum formed mainly of a network of threads called fibrins, in which dead and the damaged formed elements of the blood are trapped. Fibrins are formed by the conversion of inactive fibrinogens in the plasma by the enzyme thrombin. Thrombins in turn are formed from the another inactive substances present in the plasma called prothrombin. An enzyme complex thrombokinase is required for the above reaction. This complex is formed by a series of linked enzymatic reactions, that is cascade process involving a number of factors present in the plasma in an inactive state. An injury or a trauma stimulates the platelets in the blood to release the certain factors which activate the mechanism of coagulation. Certain factor released by the tissue at the site of injury also can initiate coagulation. Calcium ions play a very important role in clotting. Lymph, that is tissue fluid. As the blood passes through capillaries in tissues, some water along with the many small water soluble substances move out into the space between the cells of tissues, leaving the larger protein and the most of the formed elements in the blood vessels, and this fluid released out is called the interstitial fluid or the tissue fluid. It has the same mineral distribution as that in the plasma. Exchange of nutrients, gases, etc. between the blood and the cells always occur through this fluid. An elaborate network of vessels called the lymphatic system collect this fluid and drains it back to the major veins, and the fluid present in the lymphatic system is called the lymph, and lymph is a colorless fluid containing a specialized lymphocyte which are responsible for the immune responses of the body. Lymph is also an important carrier for the nutrients, hormone, etc. Fats are absorbed through the lymph in the lacteals present in the intestinal villi. Circulatory pathways. The circulatory patterns are of the two types, one open or the closed. Open circulatory system is present in arthropods and molluscs, in which the blood pumped by the heart passes through the large vessels into the open spaces or the body cavities called sinuses. Annelids and the chordates have a closed circulatory system in which the blood pumped by the heart is always circulated through a closed network of blood vessels. This pattern is considered to be more advantageous as the flow of fluid can be more precisely regulated. All vertebrates possess a muscular chambered heart. Fishes have a two-chambered heart with an arterium and a ventricle. Amphibians and the reptiles, that is, except crocodiles, have a three-chambered heart with the two arteria and the single ventricle, whereas crocodile, birds, and the mammals possess a four-chambered heart with the two arteria and the two ventricles. In fishes, the heart pumps deoxygenated blood, which is oxygenated by the gills and is supplied to the body parts, from where the deoxygenated blood is returned to the heart, that is single circulation. In amphibians and the reptiles, the left arterium receives oxygenated blood from the gills, lungs, or skin, and the right arterium gets deoxygenated blood from the other parts of the body. However, they get mixed up in the single ventricle, which pumps out mixed blood, that is incomplete double circulation. In birds and the mammals, oxygenated and deoxygenated blood received by the left and the right arteria respectively passes on the ventricles of the same sides. The ventricles pump it out without any mixing up, that is, two separate circulatory pathways are present in this organism. Hence, these animals have double circulation. Let us study the human circulatory system. Human circulatory system. Human circulatory system, also called the blood vascular system, consists of a muscular chambered heart, a network of closed branching blood vessels, and the blood, the fluid which is circulated. Heart, the mesodermally derived organ, and is situated in the thoracic cavity in between the two lungs, slightly tilted to the left. It has the size of a clenched fist, and it is protected by a double-walled membranous bag, that is pericardium, enclosing the pericardial fluid. Our heart has four chambers, two relatively upper chambers called the arteria and the two larger lower chamber called ventricles. A thin muscular wall called the interarterial septum separates the right and the left arteria, whereas the interventricular septum separates the left and the right ventricles. The arterium and the ventricle of the same side are also separated by a thick fibrous tissue called the arterioventricular septum. However, each of these septa are provided with an opening through which the two chambers of the same side are connected. The opening between the right arterium and the right ventricle is guarded by a valve formed by the three muscular flasps or cusp, the tricuspid valve, whereas a bicuspid valve or mitral valve guards the opening between the left arterium and the left ventricle. The opening of the right and the left ventricle pulmonary artery and the aorta respectively are provided with the semilunar valves. The valves in the heart allows the flow of blood only in the one direction, that is from arteria to the ventricles and from the ventricle to the pulmonary artery or aorta. These valves prevent any backward flow. The entire heart is made up of cardiac muscles. The walls of ventricles are much thicker than that of the arteria. A specialized cardiac musculature called the nodal tissue is also distributed in the heart. A patch of this tissue is present in the right upper corner of the right atrium called the SA node, that is sinoatrial node. Another mass of this tissue is seen in the lower left corner of the right atrium close to the arterioventricular septum called the arterioventricular node, AV node. A bundle of nodal fibers, arterioventricular bundle, AV bundle, continues from the AV node which passes through the arterioventricular septa to emerge on the top of the interventricular septum, immediately divides into a right and the left bundle. These branches give rise to a minute fibers throughout the ventricular musculature of the respective sides and are called Purkinje fibers. The nodal musculature has the ability to generate action potential without any external stimuli, that is, it is an autoexcitable. However, the number of action potential that could be generated in a minute vary at the different part of the nodal system. The SA node can generate the maximum number of action potential, that is 70 to 75 per minute, and is responsible for initiating and maintaining the rhythmic contractile activity of the heart. Therefore, it is called the pacemaker, and our heart normally beats 70 to 75 times in a minute, that is averages 72 beats per minute. Cardiac cycle. How does the heart function? Let us take a look. To begin with, all the four chambers of heart are in the relaxed state, that is, they are in the joint diastole. As the tricuspid and the bicuspid valves are open, the blood from the pulmonary veins and the vena cava flows into the left and the right ventricle, respectively, through the left and the right arteria. The semilunar valves are closed at this stage. The SA node now generates an action potential which stimulates both arteria to undergo a simultaneous contraction and the arterial systole. This increases the blood flow into the ventricles by about 30%. The action potential is conducted to the ventricular side by the AV node and the AV bundle, from where the bundle of His transmit it through the entire ventricular musculature. This causes the ventricular muscles to contract, that is ventricular systole. The arterial undergoes relaxation diastole, coinciding with the ventricular systole. Ventricular systole increases the ventricular pressure, causing the closure of tricuspid and the bicuspid valves due to attempted backflow of the blood into the arteria. As the ventricular pressure increases further, the semilunar valves guarding the pulmonary artery, that is right side, and the aorta, that is left side, are forced open, allowing the blood in the ventriculus to flow through these vessels into circulatory pathways. The ventricles now relax ventricular diastole, and the ventricular pressure falls, causing the closure of semilunar valves which prevent the backflow of blood into the ventricles. As the ventricular pressure declines further, the tricuspid and the bicuspid are pushed open by the pressure of an artery exerted by the blood which was being emptied into them by the veins. The blood now once again moves freely to the ventricles, and the ventricles and the artery are now again in a relaxed, that is joint diastole state as earlier. Soon the SA node generates a new action potential, and the event described above are repeated in the sequence, and the process continues. The sequential events in the heart which is cyclically repeated is called the cardiac cycle, and it consists of systole and the diastole of both the arteria and the ventricles. As mentioned earlier, the heart beats 72 times per minute. That is, that many cardiac cycles are performed per minute. From this, it could be deduced that the duration of a cardiac cycle is 0.8 seconds. During a cardiac cycle, each ventricle pumps out approximately 70 ml of the blood, which could be a stroke volume. The stroke volume multiplied by the heart rate, that is number of beats per minute, gives the cardiac output. Therefore, the cardiac output can be defined as the volume of blood pumped out of each ventricle per minute, and averages 5,000 to or 5 liter in a healthy individual. The body has the ability to alter the stroke volume as well as the heart rate, and therefore by the cardiac output. For example, the cardiac output of an athlete will be much higher than that of the ordinary man. During each cardiac cycle, two prominent sounds are produced which can be easily heard through a stethoscope. The first heart sound, that is love, is associated with the closure of tricuspid and the bicuspid valve, whereas the second heart sound, that is dub, is associated with the closure of the semilunar valves, and these sounds are clinically diagnostic significance. Electrocardiograph, that is ECG. You probably familiar with the scene from a typical hospital television show. A patient is hooked up to a monitoring machine that shows traces on a screen and makes the sound Beep, 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 beep as the patient goes to the cardiac arrest. This type of machine, that is electrocardiograph, is used to obtain an electrocardiogram, that is ECG. ECG is a graphical representation of electrical activity of the heart during a cardiac cycle. To obtain a standard ECG, a patient is connected with the machine with the three electrical leads, that is one to the each wrist and to the left ankle, that continuously monitor the heart activity. For a detailed evolution of the heart function, multiple leads are attached to the chest region. Hence, we will talk about a standard ECG. Each peak in the ECG is identified with a letter from P to T that correspond to a specific electrical activity of the heart. The P wave represents the electrical excitation or depolarization of the arteria, which leads to the contraction of the both arteria. The QRS complex represent the depolarization of the ventricles, which initiate the ventricular contraction, and the contraction starts shortly after the Q and marks the beginning of the systole. The T wave represent the return of the ventricle from the excited to the normal state, that is repolarization. The end of the T wave marks the end of systole. Obviously, by counting the number of QRS complexes that occur in a given time period, one can determine the heart and rate of an individual. Since the ECG obtained from the different individual have roughly the same shape of a given lead configuration, any deviation from this shape indicates a possible abnormality or the disease. Hence, it is of great significance, clinical significance. Double circulation. The blood flows strictly by a fixed route through the blood vessels, the arteries and the veins. Basically, each artery and the vein consist of three layers: an inner lining of the squamous endothelium, the tunica intima, and a middle layer of the smooth muscles and elastic fibers, the tunica media, and an external layer of fibrous connective tissue with collagen fibers, that is tunica externa. The tunica media is comparatively thin in the veins. As mentioned earlier, the blood pumped by the right ventricle enters the pulmonary artery, whereas the left ventricle pumps blood into the aorta. The deoxygenated blood pumped into the pulmonary artery and is passed on to the lungs, from where the oxygenated blood carried by the pulmonary vein into the left atrium, and this pathway constitute the pulmonary circulation. The oxygenated blood entering the aorta is carried by a network of arteries, arterioles, and the capillaries to the tissues, from where the oxygenated blood is collected by a system of venules, veins, and vena cava and emptied into the right atrium. This is the systemic circulation. The systemic circulation provides nutrients, oxygen, and other essential substances to the tissue and takes CO2 and other harmful substances away for elimination. A unique vascular connection exists between the digestive tract and the liver, called hepatic portal system. The hepatic portal vein carries blood from the intestine to the liver, where it is delivered to the systemic circulation. A special coronary system of blood vessel is present in our body exclusively for the circulation of blood to and from the cardiac musculature. Regulation of cardiac activity. Normal activities of heart are regulated intrinsically, that is auto-regulated by specialized muscles, that is nodal tissue. Hence, the heart is called the myogenic. A special neural center in the medulla oblongata can moderate the cardiac function through the ANS, that is autonomic nervous system. Neural signal through the sympathetic nerves, that is part of ANS, can increase the heart rate, heartbeat, and the strength of the ventricular contraction and thereby the cardiac output. On the other hand, parasympathetic neural signals, that is another component of the ANS, decrease the rate of the heartbeat and speed of conduction of action potential and thereby the cardiac output. Adrenal medullary hormones can also increase the cardiac output. Disorder of the circulatory system. First, high blood pressure, that is hypertension. Hypertension is the term for the blood pressure that is higher than the normal, that is 120 by 80. In this measurement, 120 mm of Hg, that is millimeter of mercury pressure, is the systolic or the pumping pressure, and the 80 mm of Hg is the diastolic or the resting pressure. If repeated checks for the blood pressure of an individual is 140 by 90 or over 140 over 90 or higher, it shows hypertension. High blood pressure leads to the heart disease and also affect the vital organs like brain and kidney. Second, coronary artery disease, that is CAD. Coronary artery disease, often referred to as atherosclerosis, affect the vessel that supply the blood to the heart muscles. It is caused by the deposit of calcium, fat, cholesterol, and the fibrous tissues, which makes the lumen of the arteries narrower. Angina. It is also called the angina pectoris. A symptom of acute chest pain appears when no enough oxygen is reaching the heart muscles. Angina can occur in the middle men and women of any age, but it is more common among the middle-aged and elderly. It occurs due to the condition that affect the blood flow. Heart failure. Heart failure means the state of heart when it is not pumping blood effectively enough to meet the needs of the body. It is sometimes called the congestive heart failure because of congestion of the lungs is one of the main symptoms of this disease. Heart failure is not the same as cardiac arrest when the heart stops beating, or a heart attack when the heart muscles is suddenly damaged by an inadequate blood supply.